It arguably caused a run on the banks, which some people hypothesized then turned around and said, Trudeau, what you're doing is destroying this country. You're destroying trust in the financial institutions. You're causing a run on the banks, and we can't handle it. And then before the Senate could either ratify or reject the declaration of the Emergencies Act, Justin Trudeau rescinds it. Okay, that's what gets us all to here now. When they declared the Emergencies Act, and they brought the police in literally to bust up the protest. I'm going to read this. I live in Ottawa, and downtown has been a ghost town for 2 years. It's virtually all government buildings, and they were working from home. Ottawans forgot downtowns of national capitals are typically busy and loud. I can't vet this, but the CA, the Canadian Super Chat dollars, indicates it is from Canada. So that's where we're at. When Trudeau came in with his fists of fury to bust up, you guys can read this one while I talk. When Trudeau came in with his fists of fury to bust up the kids playing on bouncy castles, hot tubs on Wellington, they arrested a bunch of the organizers of the convoy. They arrested Tamara Lich, who, from what I understand, is Métis or part Métis, although I think Métis necessarily means part not Indigenous, but I believe she's Métis. They arrested Tamara Lich. They arrested Pat King. They arrested other people who were organizers of the convoy, although there is argument as to who is the organizer, who is the I want to say the organizer, but rather who is the speaker, who represents this convoy, which by and large was an organic grassroots movement. Some people think that Pat King was not an organizer. Some people think that he co-opted onto this. Irrelevant. They arrested Tamara Lich. They arrested Pat King. Let's see what charges. I want to make sure. I'm pretty sure Pat King was only arrested on misdemeanor and incitement of misdemeanor. They arrested a bunch of others. What was his name? Not Ben. Someone can remind me of the third organizer who they arrested. They arrested them and detained them. And not just detained them, they're still being detained. Tamara Lich and Pat King, who were arrested on, it's either mischief charges, incitement to mischief, conspiracy to commit mischief. Pat King has 4 charges, and Tamara Lich has 3, I think. They're still being detained. They're still being detained, and someone says, someone's watching and says Daniel Bulford was also arrested. Either way, they arrested organizers, people who were the spokespeople for this convoy. They froze their bank accounts. I did an interview with Tom Marazzo last week, who wasn't even an organizer, but became a volunteer or a participant in the protest. They froze his bank accounts for over a week. They went after his wife's credit rating on the basis of fraudulent charges on a credit card, whatever. Pat King, love him or hate him, Tamara Lich, love her or hate her, are still being detained, arrested. It was a week ago last Friday. And I've got to share. I'm going to go see if I can share the first story. Let me scroll to the bottom of the chat just so I can keep up with this in as much as possible. I'm freezing off and on. The internet here is not particularly good, so my apologies if it is going in and out of connectivity. Charged with mischief. Okay, let me bring up the share screen. Share screen, Chrome tab. I opened up all of my things here. Let's just see what this looks like, if it's a good layout. Now I got to find StreamYard again. All right, looks good. Nice. Let me go to that so I can read it. Dislike Pat King as much as you want, but continued pretrial detention of someone accused of mischief is not how the judicial system in a civilized country works, despite what the Justice of the Peace asserts. This is an outrage and a disgrace, Justin Trudeau, and David Lametti is our Minister of Justice. This is what the judge said. This is coming from an article. I'll pull up the article in a second, but this is what the judge said, because Pat King's lawyer apparently raised arguments that Pat King is afraid of getting COVID in the crowded detention facilities and they should release him pending his trial. Also said that, I think they tried to raise the argument that Pat King is also part Indigenous because there's exemptions for arrest. There's exemptions for prohibitions on protest if you are indigenous, which is why some people were saying, how are they holding Tamara Lich in pretrial detention if there's an exception for indigenous for protests? I wanted to look into the history of that. I don't know enough about it, so I won't venture more than that. But this is what the judge, who is justifying the continued pretrial detention of Pat King on mischief charges, said. Counsel for King further argued that detention for purposes of maintaining confidence in the administration of justice should not be considered given the potential for Mr. King to serve a lengthier sentence awaiting trial than he would receive should he be found guilty. Instead, Justice Seymour ruled the opposite, that releasing King would itself cause the court to be disrespected. A reasonable person, properly informed, will lose confidence in the administration of justice should Mr. King be released. That is what the Justice of the Peace said. And we looked this up previously. Justices of the Peace. From what I understand, they're not judges who have to serve, who have to be lawyers for 10 years in order to be appointed. They are sort of lower down judges that can be appointed and don't have to have that scrutiny, that degree of scrutiny met, as far as I understand. That's what the Justice of the Peace said. I'm going to pull up the article. Yeah, I won't read this, but yes, all that to say, other people who have committed much more serious crimes were released on bail. Because we've discussed this, plenty of times before. They undertake to adhere. I mean, the thing is this. I had raised this argument earlier that they undertake to respect their bail terms or bail conditions, their terms of release. Whereas in the case of that pastor James Coates, who refused to sign off on the undertaking, said, I can't agree to this. Therefore, they continue to detain him. Tamara Lich, from what I understand, one of them had found a surety to guarantee $50,000 that they would respect their terms of release. So it's not even that they said, dog finds everything on the ground to eat. It's not even the case that in Tamara Lich and Pat King's cases, they were defiant. This my understanding now is they were not like overtly defiant. F you, I'm going to go do what I want regardless. They were agreeing to respect the terms of their release. And someone in the chat who might know, one of the two of them found a surety to post basically a $50,000 guarantee that they would respect the terms of their release. Whereas if they didn't, that surety would be appropriated by the court, and then they would be rearrested and probably justifiably detained. So that's what the judge said. But let me pull up the article so we can just walk through this, because it's a story that I don't care what anyone thinks of Pat King. It's not the way anything can work in a free and democratic society, in my humble opinion. And maybe people disagree with that. Let me just make sure I'm neurotic. I want to make sure that, okay, good. We're going to talk strategy here. I cannot vet for this article. So this article may not be 1,000% accurate. I don't know what SOO today is. Someone might want to help me with this. But apparently, Pat King's lawyer raised COVID concerns to argue for a pre-trial release. And I'll tell you, Pat King, the former Saltite fighting against COVID restrictions, has a new concern. Speaking on behalf of his client at last week's unsuccessful bail application, King's lawyer, Cal Roseman, revealed worries the self-declared, quote, investigative journalist, end quote, that's force of habit, and convoy organizer, I'm not sure that he's an organizer, but whatever, doesn't really matter, might catch COVID during what could well be an extended stay behind bars. Denied bail on Friday, King must now await trial in jail cell on charges of mischief, counseling to commit mischief, counseling to disobey a court order, and counseling to obstruct police. So those are the 4 charges. So I was not wrong, not a question of being wrong. Those are the 4 charges. And let's just skip to what the judge said. Andrew Seymour, get out of here. Andrew Seymour, the presiding justice of the peace at King's bail hearing, didn't buy Rosemond's argument and perceived a bit of situational irony. After I close this down, I'm going to talk about the strategic mistake of having made this argument, if the lawyer actually made it. It's somewhat ironic that an individual whose raison d'etre is to protest vehemently against public health measures designed to reduce the spread of COVID would now suggest that the delay or the potential for being infected at a detention center could impact the court's decision on bail. I put little weight on the submission. Anybody who's been a lawyer, you know that that's nauseating verbiage, because basically what they're saying is, you've made your arguments. I've heard both sides. I put little weight on your arguments. You have been rejected by the court. Counsel for Mr. King further argued that detention for the purposes of maintaining confidence in the administration should not be considered given the potential for Mr. King to serve a lengthier sentence awaiting trial. We already talked about this. And then we get into the Indigenous part. A reasonable person properly informed will lose confidence in the administration of justice should Mr. King be released. It's Kafka, people. It's Kafkaesque that the court itself could say, releasing. So remember, everybody, pretrial detention is detention of an individual who, legally speaking, is innocent. They have not been found guilty beyond a reasonable doubt in a court of law, and the reasons for which pretrial detention is justified, flight risk, risk of repeat offense, and danger to society, ensuring that you show up for your trial date. I mean, these are criteria that need to be met in order to justify what is, in fact, detention of a legally innocent person. He might be found guilty on the merits, but until that time, until he is found guilty beyond a reasonable doubt in a court of law, that is pretrial detention of an innocent person. And what's this person's charge? We saw it. Mischief, counseling to obstruct, yada, yada. And he could be held in jail on pretrial detention for longer than might be his conviction. But this judge says, no, people will lose faith in the system if I release this accused. Compare that to other accused who've been released. So I say this is Kafkaesque, Orwellian. Flip it around. Change the definition of words. Change the essence of the legal system. You're an accused, innocent until proven guilty, now being detained until trial because this judge, this justice of the peace, says if I release him, people will have, it'll bring the administration of justice into disrepute. And that person believes what he wrote, presumably. Just got out of the shower. Thank you, Cameron. How you doing? So, top 5 infamous rapper in Toronto was arrested, charged, put on house arrest after being charged with murder. Openly brags about. Yep. No. It's for anyone to pretend this is not political. I won't say they're lying. I won't say they're working for the government or whatever. They're lacking perspective. I would say naive, to give them the benefit of the doubt. This is purely political. It's obscene. It's absolutely obscene. Now, that being said, strategic mistake by King's lawyer. If King's lawyer did in fact say he's afraid of catching COVID, it's bad for optics. It's bad for argument, and it's sucking and blowing. Winston, get over here. It's sucking and blowing, legally speaking, because King has been openly defiant. And to raise that argument, even if it might be legally tenable, you're not going to get the sympathy of the court. So you may as well do it. Winston, get over here. Bad argument. And then they tried to argue that he was Indigenous as well. And they basically said there's no evidence. There's absolutely evidence. So that's the Pat King update. It's atrocious. Get over here, please. Stop. Okay. It's atrocious. It should not be tolerated. And even if you hate the protesters, even if you hate the convoy, no freedom-loving, justice-loving person can possibly think this is anything less than an outrage. In the early stages when I didn't have very many facts, and I said, thought experiment, what could Pat King and Tamara Litch have possibly said or done that could justify this? And I said, okay, hypothetically, they get up in court, middle fingers to the judge, say, whatever you do, I'm going to get right back out there and do what I want. Okay, I could conceivably understand that, although my argument would still be, let him out, let him do it. It's mischief. It's not murder. It's not, it's not arson. It's not trafficking. Let him out. let him do it, and then you're morally justified in denying bail the second time. But that's not even the case. That's not even the case. Apparently, there were terms of release that were proposed that were, as far as I'm concerned, quite onerous. And from the word I have inside, from other lawyers who've been there, who do criminal law, they found them to be more onerous than anything they've ever seen for drug dealers, accused assault, whatever. They were more onerous than actual violent criminals, and the court still did not grant it. So it's someone said revenge court. It's you have the Barnes had always argued that, you can't have the judges in DC adjudicating on the insurrection, because if it was an attack on the administration itself, then the judges who are doling out justice or injustice were the objects, were the victims of that attack, and therefore they can't adjudicate in a case in which they were the actual alleged victims. Same thing here. This was supposed to be an insurrection, and it was painted as that. It was painted as all sorts of bad words. And now you're going to have that justice system, those justices of the peace in that jurisdiction, doling out justice or injustice on participants. Can't happen. Cassidy the Carpenter says, their argument for not releasing King is having the opposite effect. The longer he is detained, the less confidence I have in our judicial system, as should anybody else. It's not because that justice of the peace flipped the script, so to speak. Oh, if I let him go, if I let this man go on charges of mischief, no one's going to trust the judicial system. Wait until there's another protest and they start arresting other protesters of other demographics. Imagine detaining anybody on a non-violent mischief charge. Oh, I'm sorry. And counseling to commit mischief. Just imagine that under any other circumstances. And you would be rightly egreged, and you should be egreged under these circumstances. And if you're not, it's probably only because the politics of the situation has gotten in the way. So that's Pat King. And I don't want to get into all the other stuff. Pat King has been quite, the irony is Pat King's been vocal and has said other things which might be worse than what he's actually been arrested for and charged with now. But you can't, and the other thing is, if you want to invoke his past bad behavior, you can't really do that just yet, because he's not facing criminal charges on anything else at this time other than the mischief and those 3 other charges. It's an outrage. Tamara Lich has been in jail now for going to be 2 weeks this Friday on mischief. The Canadian government needs to free everyone involved. That's it. Well, free them. They don't need to free them. Let them out. They'll have their day in court, and they'll be found guilty or innocent beyond a reasonable doubt, or innocent. They won't be found innocent. They will be found not guilty. Let them out. They will come back for their trials. And by the way, if you're nervous about them not coming back for their trials, where do you think these people are going? They parked their butts on Ottawa for 3 weeks. They're fighting for the country. They're not fleeing the country. And if your concern is them fleeing, there are ways to get around that while releasing them pre-trial. The Canadian government needs to free everyone involved. That said, reminder that the code Viva at checkout is 20% off the legal